The Texans and the Bills played a game Sunday, and the Bills and the Texans are now going in different directions. We'll discuss that in just a second here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You got that right, man. Welcome to the new Locked On NFL, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with the help of our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I'm your host, the barber, Tony Wiggins, joined by my brother and Locked On NFL expert, Kevin R. Stryker. And on today's episode, here's what we are going to be bringing you. We're going to talk about Deshaun Watson and will he ever get right? Matter of fact, I'm going to say Deshaun Watson will never get right. We'll do that in the third segment, amongst other things. In the second segment, right in the middle of the show, the 49ers losses are mounting without Christian McCaffrey. I'll let the boys from Locked On 49ers explain exactly what that means. Even though they have been getting running production, it's something that they're missing with him gone. And then the Texans and the Bills moving in opposite directions. We will talk about that and bring up some injuries. We appreciate you for making us the first listen of the day and for being an everyday here on Locked On NFL, which is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to tune in again in the morning, first thing in the morning, Locked On NFL tomorrow with Tyler, the Madman Rowland, for more NFL coverage. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Kevin Ostrach, I know you are, you were doing your thing with the Baltimore Ravens and watching them in that scintillating game the other day, but you had to have your eye a little bit on this matchup because this is two teams that are going to get in the way. It seems like after Sunday, the Texans are going in a little bit of a different directions than the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, this was the battle of Stephon Diggs, the current team versus the former team, and the current team comes out on top. And hey, you mentioned the Baltimore Ravens, which is the team I cover here. And did the Ravens break the Bills? Is that what happened?
They might have, man. I think they might. And you know what? That's a good question because early in the game, that's exactly what I was thinking. But then they made a little bit of a comeback because they got behind in that game, and I was like, oh boy, what did Baltimore end up doing to these guys? They definitely might have broken them, man. And listen to what Peacock and Williamson said, and then we'll finish the conversation up.
I want to start in the AFC, Matt, if that's okay with you. And I want to start with what was one of our favorite games coming into the week, which was the Houston Texans against the Buffalo Bills. Texans jumped out early with 14 first quarter points. The Bills came back with 14 points late in the game, and it was in the end a field goal that was the difference for the Houston Texans, who defeat the Buffalo Bills 23-20, and the Bills now fall to 3-2 with the Texans a commanding lead, crowned them the champions of the AFC South already at a 4-1, and they have the biggest lead on anybody of any division in the NFL.
Yeah, it's a huge win. I mean, certainly for AFC tiebreakers and things like that, we could go back and look at this game. And as you mentioned, just controlling what looks like a pretty bad division other than Houston. And I'm not sure Houston's even playing their best. They're not running the ball, great yet, but it's gradually better.
Yeah, so Houston doesn't look like they're absolutely at the top of their game, but they still have managed to get themselves to 4-1. That's a huge lead in the division that they're in. And now they got to deal with Nico Collins possibly being out or at least being slowed down by a hamstring.
Yeah, and again, they have dealt with some offensive injuries with Joe Mixon, who that hip drop tackle, which was not even called on the play that suffered. I mean, the NFL's plays and stuff, they're placing the emphasis on it, but not really because there have been a couple of those plays this year. But man, Nico's so good. He is so good. And the Texans are one of the more equipped teams to handle that because they do still have Diggs, and obviously they've missed Tank Dell for a little as well. He's been in and out, but man, it's like, you go into the season, if you're a team and you have all these skill position players and you're like, look at all these weapons that we have. And then we're just a little over a month into the season. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, where'd our guys go? So they're 4-1. They're in a good spot. And we'll talk about it a little later in terms of winning with injuries versus losing with injuries, because they can have a really big difference on a season. Because if Houston was losing these games with these guys out, when their star players came back, they'd be in some level of a hole that they would have to climb out of. They don't have to worry about that because they've been winning even with these guys out. So I think it's huge that they were able to get this one over Buffalo, despite the Bills, as you mentioned, making a little bit of a comeback there towards the end.
And 3 weeks into the season, we all thought Buffalo, hey, man, Buffalo, they have retooled their team and they lost all of these people, and they knew what they had in development. And I'm not writing them off so far, but after 3 weeks, we were putting them in the playoffs, and we were saying that Coach McDermott is like the greatest coach on earth. And now all of a sudden, they're sort of, and Baltimore might have broken them, but they're kind of turning into the team that we thought that they were over the last 2 weeks. And now with Josh Allen ailing, I don't know what happened. I don't want to say it was a concussion, but kind of looked like it was. And they said it was a chest injury when he went down. But they're starting now to have some attrition. Von Miller suspended, they're getting banged up a little bit. Now you might see the effects of all of those guys not being there this year.
Yeah, and I think we saw the biggest loss for them right now, at least in week 5, was Khalil Shakir, because they already, with Stephon Diggs not being there, they were already trusting some either unproven or veterans who aren't really that good anymore, like a Curtis Samuel or a Mac Hollins, who haven't really given them anything this year. Shakir's been their guy. And yes, they have James Cook. Yes, they have Dalton Kincaid and some really talented players. But that receiver room is super, super concerning, because at this point, I mean, it's Shakir, and then you need to have Keon Coleman step up, who had moments. Obviously, he's had some moments this season. But are you really going to place the burden of your wide receiver position on a rookie if Khalil Shakir can't go? That's a tall order. So I wouldn't be shocked if Buffalo is in on a wide receiver or just another offensive skill position player at the deadline.
And the thing that we talk about them and we say physical. When you think about the way that they play, their running game, James Cook is small. James Cook is not a big player. They don't necessarily have a reliable power back that if they wanted to continue to take some of that pressure off of Josh Allen, if he is a little bit banged up, and if those receivers aren't up to it right now because of their inexperience or too much experience, like he said, then I don't think they have that element. So I would look for them also. Like, you imagine if they had a guy like Samaje Perine who could really, really help them as a veteran, big, thick running back. They don't really have that. So we'll see if this attrition continues to add up for Buffalo. But right now, the Texans are 4-1. I don't think they played their best football, but it doesn't matter. They're 4-1, and they're atop of the AFC South. We're going to get to the 49ers, man, who are having some problems, and the injuries are mounting on this team. And yesterday, they kind of looked like a team that they were running out of gas too, and they got beat by the Arizona Cardinals. We'll hear from Locked On 49ers in just a second when we get to segment 2 here on Locked On NFL. Today's show on Locked On NFL is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Period, point blank, end of discussion. There is no other sports book in America as good as FanDuel. And if you love football season and you need to get off to a good start, I got something for you right now. You get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you placed your first ever $5 bet on FanDuel. Now, you heard me again. You don't have to win. You just have to place a $5 bet on FanDuel, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. And once you make those bets, you don't even have to leave that screen to check your player stats, the play-by-play. You don't have to exit that screen and go somewhere else. It's all right there where your bets are, so you can stay right there and stay focused and see if your money is going to hit your pocket. That's right. FanDuel is the place you need to go, because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Today's show is also sponsored and brought to you by Hillsdale College. That's right. Listen, man, let me explain something to you. You ever thought about learning something and you could actually learn it for free? That's right. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? History, economics, the great works of literature, right now might be a good time to take up one of these courses I see called Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution. You can do all of that at Hillsdale because Hillsdale's courses are self-paced. So you can start whenever and tune in whenever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/locked on to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked on to register. hillsdale.edu/locked on. All right, swinging you back right here on Locked On NFL, segment number 2, here with my buddy Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On NFL, and of course, Locked On Ravens, running it down, his little team winning games and coming back and making all these heroic. And we ain't gonna talk about them today. I ain't gonna even let you get in on here.
Oh, come on, man.
Start flexing about your little MVP quarterback and all of this stuff, and maybe your co-MVP running back. We ain't gonna get into all of that. I'll tell you what, somebody else is missing a running back, and it's Christian McCaffrey. And there was some talk earlier. You know how barbershop talk goes, right? When they replaced him with that young kid out there, and that kid starts going for 100 yards every game, everybody was like, see, anybody could do that in Shanahan's offense. I said, that's the same thing people used to say about his daddy's offense. But that kid isn't Christian McCaffrey. And I'm going to let my man Eric Crocker of Locked On 49ers tell you exactly why he's not Christian McCaffrey.
It was a little tough to watch in the fourth quarter because you could see it kind of unraveling a little bit. And I started to see those messages kind of filter through my timeline on social media about how this is very reminiscent of the Rams game, a game where you were up double digits and then struggled to kind of get those late points in this game. And ended up playing, kind of a worst nightmare scenario there. I think for me, some of the issues that are going on with this team, I think comes down to one key thing that's clearly missing. And I'm not one to overreact to anything. And I like to give things time to kind of play out so I can get a bigger picture of exactly what's going on. But recently I talked about Christian McCaffrey and how well Jordan Mason has been running. And, how much do you miss Christian McCaffrey? And I talked about certain things that CMC allows Kyle Shanahan to do offensively, right? Just be a little bit more creative. You're more creative with the ways that you're able to utilize him, how he kind of opens things up for everyone else. But one thing that I kind of failed to mention was Christian McCaffrey's effect in the red zone. And so far this year, the 49ers have not been good in the red zone.
KO, man, listen. Numbers can say one thing, but they don't tell the whole story, as I love to say here in the barbershop. Christian McCaffrey means so much from a formation standpoint. And just like Crocky said, he opens everything up. So there's an effect that he has on the field that when he's not there, it's missing.
It is quite literally the Christian McCaffrey effect, and all great players have it. And I'll give you another example. You weren't going to give me the time of day to talk about the Ravens. Well, guess what? The Derrick Henry effect, Wig, that's real. Gus Edwards and JK, those were two great backs in Baltimore. But you know what? Derrick Henry is a completely different beast. And it's the same thing with Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco. Jordan Mason is a good running back. I think he's really talented. But he's not Christian McCaffrey because there's so many more things, just little nuances or just things that McCaffrey can do just a little bit better, or even some things he can do a lot better than Jordan Mason. He's one of the best running backs in the league, and the way that he can be utilized by San Francisco, they can't utilize Jordan Mason like that. And that takes pressure off of an opposing defense because they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to worry about one of the best running backs in the league. Jordan Mason is a good player, but he's not Christian McCaffrey, and that limits what San Francisco can do offensively, and it takes a lot off of a defense's plate in terms of getting ready and preparing as well as executing on game day.
Can they win with Jordan Mason at running back? Yes. Will they make yards on the ground? Yes. But it ain't the same. And there is something about being that dude. I think one of the things that I always think about is eat your breakfast. Like, pay attention. You got to keep the main thing the main thing. That is what Christian McCaffrey makes linebackers and safeties do. Yeah. Keep the main thing the main thing, because guess what? You think that other kid is getting these yards, he won't just get the yard. He'll destroy you. He'll break your will. And because they don't have that element in the game, I do believe that it is affecting them. They're not able to close out games. They may end up throwing it a little bit more than they're comfortable with in some situations. And you can't allow stats to trick you and make you think that teams like that don't miss great players. Speaking of teams that overcome injuries, as you segued earlier, you mentioned earlier we were going to talk about the Green Bay Packers. Now, when you think about it, they're sitting there at 3-2. But if I told you that they were only going to have Jordan Love for 2 games and then he was going to be unhealthy the other game, and that Christian Watson wasn't going to be there, and Romeo Dobbs was going to get suspended for God knows what. I don't know what the hell he got going on up there. But if I told you all of those things, you would have said, ain't no way that they're 3-2. But guess what? They're 3-2. And my man, Peter Bukowski, is talking about the ways that they're finding new people to help them get through these injuries.
Tucker Kraft has a chance to take this team to the next level. He had a monster catch and run touchdown. He is looking a little bit like George Kittle, like baby Kittle, like Kittle light. 2 touchdowns again in this game. He is becoming a focal point in this offense. And when this offense is healthy, they have a chance to be the best in the NFL.
Key phrase, when this offense is healthy. But just like you said earlier, they're maintaining until some of these guys can come back into the fold.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And we talked about it earlier in the show, Wig. It's like, if you don't put yourself in a hole when your star positional players aren't there, when those guys get back, you can take off like nothing happened, because you're not going to be in this hole you got to climb out of. But if these guys come back and Green Bay was 1-4, 2-6, like something along those lines, because their depth couldn't step up, your skill position stars are back, but all of a sudden you're fighting to make the playoffs and you're not in a good position. So the fact that Green Bay's been able to do this, and by the way, they almost came back on Minnesota and won that game last week. So it's not like they didn't put up a fight in any of these losses. So I'm impressed with them, because I think a lot of people were wondering if those injuries would kind of be the nail in the coffin for these teams. But Green Bay is one of those teams who was overcome. They've needed it, especially because Minnesota is not losing right now, so they have to keep pace any way they can.
They do have to keep pace. And even though Minnesota is undefeated and they're doing their thing, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to win that division if things keep going this way, you look at the teams that are able to survive being banged up. Now, the Vikings got a couple of injuries now, but I just watched Kansas City go 5-0 last night, right? And they're banged up, but they just keep going out on the street and getting dudes that used to be in their program and bringing them in. Kareem Hunt had like 100 yards rushing. I mean, they always go back. Remember who caught the game-winning touchdown? Mecole Hardman. He wasn't even on the team like a month before that. So it's like they have a type, and they know who they are, man. And this is why the teams that are able to sustain and get through injuries, one of the things that they can do is they don't have to change their playbook, because they know exactly who they have on their team. Some of these teams really do put up team building lessons, cliff notes for team building for a lot of teams around the NFL. They just don't get it. Tell you who's doing real well is Washington, and they beat the Browns, who aren't doing real well. I'll tell you in segment 3, along with Kevin Oestreicher, exactly why I think Deshaun Watson, I think I got my answer on him. I don't think he'll ever be back to who he used to be. We'll discuss that segment number 3 here on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored by Game Time. That's right, man. Game Time is where you need to go to make sure you get tickets for any single event there is. I don't care what it is, man. It could be football, boxing, UFC, theater, monster trucks. If they're doing it in an arena, Game Time got tickets. And if you don't get paid until the event starts, don't worry about it. Don't fret, because they focus on last-minute deals and they'll get you straight. They will prioritize picking the right tickets for you through curation, where it's easy to save on more sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. Download the Game Time app and take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code. I'll spell it for you. LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On NFL, where it's your team every day. Did you see Jaden Daniels? Jaden Daniels continues to dominate. And one of the things I noticed about that game, man, when I saw him the other day, and I saw who he was playing against, and it was Deshaun Watson. And I just go back and think, like, man, 4 years ago, that was Jaden Daniels. It's the same. Everybody was feeling the same way. And of course, with all of his off the field stuff, I don't know if it's shame. I don't know if his body's breaking down. Deshaun Watson ain't even the same, KO. And it looks like I got my answer wondering if he was ever going to get back.
Yeah, and this Cleveland team, I mean, it looks like they're just going to ride this out till the bitter end. It looks like they're just going to stick with it. They invested a ton of money, a ton of draft capital, and it, you know, whether that's a coaching, general manager, ownership move, whichever one you want to believe it is, they're sticking with him. But he doesn't look confident out there. He doesn't look like the Houston Deshaun Watson, very far from it. He looks like a shell of himself. And obviously, with all the off-field stuff that went on, it didn't really feel like a move that Cleveland needed to make at the time. And now you see Baker out there thriving in Tampa, and a bunch of Cleveland fans is, oh, well, what if he stayed in Cleveland? But Cleveland hasn't been a place that quarterbacks have been able to thrive in really their entire existence. So for Deshaun, it's already going to go down as the worst trade in NFL history. I mean, you'd have to take out some miraculous thing, which I don't think is ever coming at this point anymore. But Cleveland's in a tough spot because they have a lot of young talent. They have a lot of good talent. But the quarterback position, you have, what, $150 million guaranteed left on that deal? I mean, you're riding this thing out, or you're cutting them and losing a whole lot of money off of it. So they're in a tough spot, and this move set their franchise back a lot of years.
It did. So it's a tale of two franchises going in two different directions because of the same position. Listen to what David Harrison said about the game the other day.
Zone interception in the first quarter, and you're facing a team that's looking to get off of a 1-3 start in the first quarter of the NFL team. This is David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast. And if you're Washington Commanders, you're going to do what every other NFL team would do, and you're going to hang 34 points on that same team from that point forward. Jaden Daniels started his Week 5 matchup against the Cleveland Browns, completing just 50% of his passes, 5 for 10. He threw an interception at the 1-yard line. Browns linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah coming up with that one. But from there on, the Washington Commanders, like I said, able to hang 34 points on the Cleveland Browns defense. But not just that, the defensive side of things for the Commanders, able to keep Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns from taking advantage of that slow start and holding them to just 13 points. For more on this game and everything going on with the Washington Commanders, check out the Locked On Commanders podcast 5 days a week, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
There's a little bit of visible frustration, it appeared, from Kevin Stefanski and Deshaun Watson. Now, we later found out that it was blown out of proportion, of course, because people are going to think the absolute worst, obviously, when it involves Deshaun Watson. Apparently, they had too many men on the field, and he didn't want to waste the time out, and this, that, and the third, and they were going to get a penalty. So the game was over with by that point, but it just seems like it is just, you just passed it at this point, KO.
I don't see any way that this gets better, and their refusal to start Jameis Winston. I mean, they're already in a 1-4 hole. And in the AFC North, I mean, Baltimore's 3-2, Pittsburgh is 3-2, Cincinnati's 1-4 along there with them. So it's not like the division is totally out of reach. But if they keep starting Deshaun, it is going to be out of reach, because I just don't think you can compete with him. He's missing easy throws, like throws that backups would make in their sleep, short throws that backups would make in their sleep. And it feels like not everybody in the organization really agrees with it. It feels like there's some, hey, what are we doing? And on top of that, it feels like they let Joe Flacco go to Indy because of the fact that I feel like if we had gotten to this point and Joe was still on the roster, everybody would be calling for Joe, because he's this guy that led him to the playoffs last year. And I think that some in that locker room wouldn't be shocked if they thought Joe was the better option based off of what we've seen from both quarterbacks. So it feels like they're not doing what's best for their franchise. It feels like they're trying to salvage any value, any little smidge of value they can. That's not how you should be operating.
Right now, 2 words: sunken cost. That's what it is. Yep. You got to give them the money anyway, so you might as well try to win while you're going to be paying them the money. The Cowboys, keep finding a way. Every time I want to write off the Dallas Cowboys, and they were missing like the top 4 pass rushers, right? And I'm thinking like, ain't no way they're going to win this game. Guess what? They got production from people. They pulled the Baltimore Ravens. They got production from people that you never heard of. Listen to my man McCool and my man Mosier. Eminem, that's what I'm going to call him, from Locked On Dallas Tech, Locked On Cowboys.
I thought a couple players had some of the best games of their career. Like Chauncey Golson is not a bendy rusher, but he did do a good job of pushing back the pocket and at least making Justin Fields feel uncomfortable. He had 4 pressures, 4 hurries, couple tackles for a loss. Like, I thought he played as well as you could expect a defensive tackle playing defensive end to play. Like, he performed fine. Even Tyrus Wheat, I mean, we'll talk about his penalty in a little bit, but like, he didn't look out of place on the field. I do think the further that we go on in the season, the more those players will probably be exposed. But for a 1-game thing here, I thought they played really well. I also want to mention Oso Digizua and Linval Joseph both played awesome. And I think that was a big reason why they were able to have success on defense.
All right, so I know who Linval Joseph is, right? Those other dudes, I have no idea who those people are, and they all stepped up and they won a game for the Dallas Cowboys yesterday. But this continues our theme for the day. Folks are finding a way through injuries to be able to manufacture wins that they hope will sustain them until they get their other guys back.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you have to do, because that Pittsburgh defense is no joke. The offense is something different there. But again, Dallas hung around, and then they get the game-winning play with Jalen Tolbert, who, again, people are like, okay.
See?
Well, you know, who's this guy? Who's this guy stepping up for Brandon Cooks right here? And again, on the defense, you don't have Micah Parsons. You don't have DeMarcus Lawrence. Other guys go down at that position. They don't have Deron Bland already, who obviously was the pick-6 king last year. And they're still, you know, the Dallas defense hasn't performed up to the level of expectation. But, hey, I mean, that'll happen when you don't have all your stars out there except for 1 or 2 of them. So credit to Dallas, you know, it was a gritty win. Dak being what? There are all those Sunday night, Monday morning jokes. There was an interception on both Sunday night and Monday morning. So, you know what? He did that, 3 turnovers. But, you know, Dallas got a win. A win is a win.
And they lost the rookie tackle. You know, he limped off the field, Guyton. So no telling what they're going to do with that. I think he's going to run out. I put them in the same category. You know, I mentioned Cleveland, but I gave David Harrison a little bit of love with the Commanders.
Yeah,
that's going to finally be a good game this year. The Commanders versus the Cowboys in the NFC East. And you throw in the Philadelphia Eagles for good measure, too, once they start getting people back. Speaking of an injured team, they probably benefited from a bye this week because they were truly banged up. Now I heard both of their receivers are going to be back. You'll be back, too, man, next Tuesday. That's what you hear all the time with me, Kevin Ostracker, the local expert. That's what we do here on Locked On NFL, and we do it twice. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL, both versions, the AM version and the lunchtime version. The AM version is with the madman Tyler Rowland. He does the same thing, talks to the NFL experts that know your team better than anyone else. And then come on, slide by the barbershop with me. We laid back. We're bringing up everybody's business, and we're gossiping, and we're doing all that kind of stuff. So two shows, same place, different times. That's right. Locked On NFL. Make sure you check us out wherever you get podcasts, wherever you hear them, or on our YouTube page at Locked On NFL. Kevin Ostracker, man, we appreciate you joining us. We thank you again. As always, we'll see you next time, next week here, same time, same place. You guys take care of each other, and we'll do the same thing.